Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Abby Nye. And for those of you who are not familiar with CFCtoo, we are a community of survivors from a church group of churches called Christian Fellowship Center in upstate New York. And we support survivors in a lot of different ways. We provide avenues and platforms for them to tell their stories if they would like to, but a lot of times we do private support, one-on-one type conversations, just helping people process and
Mm,
helping them figure out the language of like what happened to them. We also publish a lot of sort of educational or sort of explanatory blog posts that again kind of try to give language to some of the different types of abuse that people experience in high control church settings. So that's actually kind of how Marissa originally interfaced with CFCtoo. She was kind enough to ghost edit some of those original blog series that we did back in 2022 when CFCtoo was first getting off the ground. And they are extremely relevant today.
mm,
The
mhm,
blog series, and they overlap really well with the myth of good Christian parenting.
mm,
They were about, how high control churches treat children. For our Broken Arrow series, and then one on the Quiverful families. So both of those are very relevant to this. Um, Marissa and Kelsey, we are so glad you are here. Thank you for joining us. Would you please introduce yourselves for our audience members today?
Sure. I'll let Marissa go first.
Oh, okay. Sure. I'm Marissa Burt, and thank you so much for having us here. It's a delight to speak with you, and I so appreciate. I was thinking about those series, those blog post series this week with the headlines about more allegations of abuse and confession of abuse in the Duggar family, and thinking about those quiverful dynamics. So I appreciate the education and advocacy you all do so much. Yeah, so I what to say? I live out in the Seattle area. I am a mom to 6 children. I am an author, novelist, editor, and also married to an Anglican priest. And so I have a lot of interest in healthy Christian communities, what we can do to advocate for the well-being of the most vulnerable, to equip communities to make repairs, to work to be safer environments for everyone. And that was actually a big piece of what drew me to this work originally, was the desire to spotlight ways Christian teaching directly enables all manner of abuse and really free some people up from feeling beholden to that. And also, as you mentioned, Abby, give people vocabulary to kind of connect dots with their experience. I think also it's really important that people still within the greater Christian community take some measure of accountability for this by bearing witness, by validating and saying, yes, this we see you, this happened. We affirm that certainly by looking at these primary sources to be able to say, yes, people applied this teaching as they were told to do. A number of people experienced all manner of abuse. So that was a key piece of me approaching this work to begin with. I have a master's in general theological studies with a focus on church history. So this sociology of religion is of interest to me and relevant to this work. And actually, Kelsey and I connected on Twitter back in the Twitter days, and that is how we got connected. So I'll turn it over to you, Kelsey.
Yeah. So thank you for having us. It's really fun to be here and get to talk about this work with other people in real time, which it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing how rare that is in these days of sort of writing books and talking to people online. So, right. So I live in Iowa, central Iowa. I am the mother of three, 6, 8, and 4. So you may hear them in the background as we are here. You probably will, in fact, if you haven't already. I am married to a fellow kind of college professor. I have a PhD in musicology, which is basically music history or kind of the study of how humans interact with music. So I'm not a performer, more of a cultural historian, at least by academic training. So I teach at Grandview University in Des Moines in both the music and the theology departments. I teach classes on sacred music and congregational worship practices, as well as some assorted classes like death and dying and poverty, racism, and power from this past year. So sort of a smattering of liberal arts courses, along with kind of the run-of-the-mill music history courses. I also am a writer for Christianity Today. I write three-ish articles a month on worship practices very broadly across particularly the American church, though not exclusively in the American church. And I'm very interested in studying ecumenically the congregational practices with things like arts, but also writing more broadly about some cultural trends like tradwife culture, momfluencers, those kinds of things as well. So those are kind of the different professional hats I wear at the moment. I'm trying to think of anything else that would be relevant to share. I come from a very what I call normie evangelical background, which means I went to a big Southern Baptist church growing up. Then we moved to the Midwest where we joined an evangelical free church. So my very kind of normie evangelical bona fides, there they are. My parents were on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. So I would say I did not grow up in what I experienced as high control religion, but adjacent to it and touching it in different ways. And as I hear more stories from people who did, I can see the places where that could have really gone a different way, or in a less healthy community, I could have been much differently impacted by this. So yeah, that's kind of my work and where I'm coming from here.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. I love how your respective backgrounds have led you um, to publish this book.
Mm.
Um, which I want to briefly talk about this before kind of diving into some questions. So this came out in October, um, and it's, in my opinion, quite short. It's less than 200 pages. Um, What are some of the themes that you've gotten a lot of feedback on or that have really resonated with people as you've heard from readers over the past few months?
Mm. It's a good question. I mean, I can kind of speak for myself from the things people have reached out to me. I think over time, some readers who at least who follow us on like social media may have a sense of what Marissa tends to write about or talk about and what pieces of this I contributed more to. Obviously, we co-wrote this book. Both of us, I think, for each chapter had a heavier hand in each one. And so I mean, I'll sort of speak to the pieces that I get the most feedback or the things that I've written about. In particular, a chapter on kind of the humanity and autonomy of children. Are children even human? I feel like it's been really fun to talk with people about the potential for just a different kind of worldview when we consider that children are fully human and that God is present to them as individuals, and the ways that that opens up ethical frameworks for us to engage as we talk about church communities. Something that I am personally very interested in is helping Christians get more comfortable with some of the language of human rights frameworks when we talk about the rights of children. During grad school, I worked at a think tank that focused on human rights research. And we did a big Department of Labor funded project on the rights of the child, the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. And I have always been troubled by how uncomfortable some Christians are with the idea of talking about the rights of children, for a number of reasons we can get into. I'm sure that a lot of you can imagine why that is the case for a lot of, especially conservative Christian parents. There is a ton of fear in the United States specifically. And so it has been rewarding for me to talk with people and see them maybe consider, you can just ask the question, is it ethical to spank a child? Like, we can just ask that question and consider it as a separate question from what does the Bible say about spanking?
Mhm.
Not that that doesn't matter. It's just that can be a question that is relevant for a Christian to consider, and not that doesn't equate to letting somebody else kind of be higher than scripture or something. So that's something that I find myself thinking about a lot, but also am very encouraged by when I have a conversation with someone who has just never thought of that before, and has never thought that like the human rights of children is anything other than like a liberal like fever dream kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that. I really appreciated that chapter, especially because the first book talk CFCtoo ever did was with Ryan Stoller and his child liberation
Mm-hmm.
theology book.
So
Um,
formative for
So
me
excellent.
personally.
and like I really appreciated that book because it definitely opened up like new frameworks for me to consider these very issues. And so to see that through line, and then to see you addressing this in a book that is, I would say, a bit more geared toward evangelicals, was really rewarding for me to see.
Good. Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah, I love that chapter and the invitation that's there to be like, we could do this a different way.
Mhm.
Um, I hear a fair bit from people responding to discussions about corporal punishment. I end up writing and talking about that more than I originally would have imagined. And yeah, that continues to resonate with people. I think whole generations were formed by this. It was an integral part of it. Certainly there are some people out there who will say I was spanked and they turned out fine, but I hear from a number of people that's not the case. And so they often want to connect over that. They're kind of unpacking that. I hear from a lot of people who, as they maybe became parents themselves, it had them reframing things from their childhood and revisiting them in different ways. I also hear from a number of people about ideas about sin and atonement. Something I hear pretty regularly is that maybe my page is the first place they have heard that, oh, penal substitutionary atonement, this idea of Jesus being punished on the cross for our sins
Mhm.
and taking our place, is only one of multiple views of the atonement the church has historically held. So I think sometimes those elements, even though we do have a chapter on sin in the book, even though we don't really make a case about atonement theory, it comes up for people because of all the stowaway theological ideas that are wrapped up in Christian parenting teaching and family practices. So I hear about that a good amount. And then probably the next thing I really hear a lot about is estrangement and an authentic connection.
Yeah.
And I hear both from adults reflecting back on their childhood and from older parents reflecting back on their experience of parenting. And it's difficult to hear, and also a privilege to kind of listen and attend to that, the grief and anger and betrayal that a number of people are experiencing. And this is something I've seen mirrored in the pastoral context, like in parish ministry as well. So I think there's a lot of shame surrounding this concept. And so as people navigate that, it can be isolating. They can be feeling overwhelmed or alone, or a number of things. So I hear from a lot of people on that. I continue to think that we're on really just scratching the surface of how pervasive that may be in families shaped by evangelical parenting practices. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind for me.
Yeah. And I love that sort of people have, but felt comfortable reaching out to you
Mm,
about these pieces
mm-hmm,
of your book. I also know that as you were writing the book, you sort of uh, offered an informal survey where people could share their experiences with you. And I think, Kelsey, you were the person who spearheaded that. Um, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of the types of responses that you got, perhaps like what percentage, if you can remember, were kids versus parents, and what were some of the themes that came out from those responses?
The survey was definitely a joint effort, and it had multiple. we had multiple visions about what that could be like. We on the one hand, we're drawn to trying to do something quite more expansive and extensive and rigorous in terms of, going to IRB at my institution and trying to do that. And we're steered away from that for a number of reasons, some just logistical in terms of timeline for a non-academic book. As you mentioned, this book is 200 pages. We had to push for every word that ended up in there.
It's so brutal.
I mean, it truly was brutal. A non-academic book on a subject like this, it feels unbelievably like scratching the surface of a huge topic. Yeah. So we decided to go for a much more kind of qualitative style survey that would get the kind of data that I get like when I interview people for a story for CT, right? As a journalist, when I'm going out there to write a story, most of the stories I do, I talk with several people, and they are just in-person conversations to get a picture of something. And I have to recognize that it's an incomplete picture, that it's a picture coming from a particular person, but that has value. There's a reason why journalists do that. And so we wanted to invite people to share their stories, whether with their name attached or not. These are tender things we're asking people to talk about. And so it was a survey that we put out on in like a Google form, and people could respond to a number of questions as they saw fit. All none, and some of them we did follow up with afterward for kind of additional conversations. We did not interview any minors for this, I will say. So I think it's important to state, like, we didn't go and seek out children to interview. I find myself in hindsight wondering if we should have thought more about that, but that comes with all kinds of other privacy concerns around consent and also just the pressure of putting a child in a position where you're asking questions about how their parent is. It's just, there are all kinds of complications there that I personally am not that comfortable with, especially for a study that wouldn't have IRB guardrails. So we did not speak with children that are still children. But in terms of talking with people who are sharing their stories as children who grew up under these teachings that we talk about versus parents who are parenting, I mean, we definitely had more children who were raised under the teachings of Dobson or under the teachings of Ted Tripp. I mean that, Marissa, I don't know. I would say at least 2/3, if not 3/4, were from that perspective.
The majority were,
yeah. We did have some parents who were comfortable sharing their stories with us. We were really grateful for those. And some really heartbreaking from parents who were kind of reckoning with their own history, and that, takes courage to be willing to share. So we were grateful for those. And so if you do read the book, you'll see there are places where we've just tried to give some longer chunks of those stories without we didn't do a whole lot of like cherry picking quotes. We tried to give chunks of these stories, just letting people share their experience as they wrote it. And I think, I'm glad that those are out there. I'm glad that people can read this book and see, this is how I experienced this. This is what it felt like. This is what I remember of this, Yeah,
and we intended to keep them really open-ended. The questions we asked, we didn't want to be directive, so people could just share, with the idea that anything we would include in the book would attempt to be representative. We tried to pick selections of people describing in their own words things that we had heard multiple times, because again, we're trying to do this very broad work, and so there are limits to that. We tried to think of touch points for people's story. So for instance, we have a chapter really discussing the blueprints in the family home, ideas about biblical manhood and womanhood, as a way to hopefully give people touch points. I mean, again, it's just scratching the surface, but the stories became powerful ways to show, not tell, how this played out for a number of people. They were, I think, majority women. We did hear from some men, and did try and seek out that a little bit more, because the survey skewed that way. almost entirely white, which really fits the subculture we're examining of white evangelical teaching. I would say most of the adult children reflecting back were probably millennial Gen X generation. And so, yeah, that was a significant piece of it. And then we also sought out, I mean, I'm trying to think, there were also just some stories that came in through other channels, through people sending messages or interviews that we later asked for consent to include, kind of reached out on an individual basis. So we kind of did a number of things. In the beginning, I had this vision. My background isn't in research. So I had this like starry-eyed vision of like, wouldn't it be great to get some data? Because I'm very curious. I don't even know how you'd get at this to know what rates of estrangement and authentic connection are in evangelical families. And that was kind of something I was like, I wonder what we'd find there. And it was great working. I mean, in so many ways, our backgrounds really complement each other. And I was so grateful that Kelsey brought an academic background and quite early on was able to be like, look, there are so many layers here to even to begin to approach the scope of an investigation like, or research like that, is really nearly impossible to do and certainly impossible for us to do. So I think observational became a helpful window.
Yeah. And I would love for someone to do that, by the
I hope
way. Like
somebody
I would
does.
love for someone to do
Mm-hmm.
that study and design that study. And I assume someone will, because I think there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It would be a lot of work, but hopefully somebody will. Um, Thinking back on some of the responses, or perhaps even just people you've talked to in preparation for the book or in response to the book, I'm really curious to hear what you have heard come up about topics that aren't often covered, but especially in high controlled churches and with survivors that like CFCtoo works with, the themes of sibling abuse, sort of like the buddy system or being a second mom, like the parentification of especially the eldest daughters, um, the ways that these kind of blueprints not only set parents and children at odds, but sometimes put children in really awful places in relationship to each other. And I'm wondering if those themes came up a lot for you.
Mm. Yeah, the one that stands out most to me is hearing people describe witnessing their siblings be harmed.
Mhm.
Like kids who maybe were the good one in their family or the more quiet one, the less strong-willed one, witnessing what would happen or hearing from the other
Remembering the
room,
sound. Yeah, we heard that
remembering
a
the
lot.
sound. That was really heartbreaking to me. And I think the psychological damage of that and the ways that that sets up siblings to sort of, in some ways, a sibling in a family can kind of become the bad one, become the strong-willed one, become labeled that way. And it sets in motion these patterns that just continue between parents and children, but then also between siblings, where you have children who are afraid for their sibling, but also deeply concerned now with not angering their parent that way and not wanting to be associated too closely with that sibling. Those kinds of stories make me so sad because a child does not know how to process that combination of fear and sadness and desire to please a parent. Someone, and I can't remember who, is writing a book about the fawning kind of impulse
Mm.
among evangelical
Isn't
women.
that, I think Sheila is.
Is
Sheila
it Sheila?
Gregoire. I think that's her
Sheila
next book.
Gregoire.
Wonderful. So glad
Yeah.
because I think about that. I am the oldest of four girls from that era of parenting. And there was definitely one child in our family that was more strong-willed than the others. And witnessing what that brought out from not just my parents, but from other adults, I learned from that. And I very much relate to when people talk about kind of the fawning self-preservation. So I think there's all kinds of fallout from
Yeah.
that dynamic between siblings.
Yeah. And I think something really unique to the quiverful and large family logistics element was hearing from siblings who maybe were required to, to implement corporal punishment on younger children. Like they were told to operate in their parents' stead. So if they were babysitting, if they were running the household for that day or whatever, and the regret maybe those older siblings felt as that expectation and just that norm that they simmered in. We also heard unique, a minority of people, but particularly among people who experience corporal punishment as child sexual abuse. Some of them named kind of like spanking games or the way that sibling abuse that made space for sibling abuse in unusual ways, whether it was the need to act out the dominance after children had been so, had to be so submissive and erased. And so I think a psychologist could probably speak to that more aptly, but that was a piece that was enough that I noted that of like, that is something that I hadn't even heard much about, but people were resonating with. And I'm glad for, one really lovely thing about online communities is there can be space for people to kind of safely share that or realize that maybe this something they experienced they weren't the only one or something like that, and can generate more conversation. And I see more of that happening around particularly people who tie punitive practices to later sexual dysfunction or different things like that. So that was a piece. I think there's been an interesting conversation this week. I think we texted a little bit about Abby over on Tia Leving's Substack about the fragility that can come with pointing out these dynamics in large homeschooling families. And I mean fragility from homeschooling parents.
Right.
Where current homeschooling parents or past homeschooling parents, like there's a very real fragility that continues to silence homeschool alumni, people who were raised in these communities who are like, here I am to tell you what that was like from a child's perspective. And still the next generation is replicating some of these same things, even though we know that it not only doesn't work, it causes a lot of harm. It's incredibly destructive. And I think parentification of eldest daughters is one of them. The buddy system is a necessary thing to make family life work if you have so many children, but it's presented as like this helpful tip, something rather than the acknowledgement that two adults cannot, and really often it's one adult, right? It's often the
Right.
mom who is doing all the home education, the homemaking, all of that, can simply not parent that many children. And so there's very much this same thread of living outside of reality, this make these choices on faith and a kind of magical thinking that sort of can carry people a certain extent, but really keeps them stuck, not reckoning with the cost of their choices and the consequences of their choices. And that really does contribute to the inauthentic connection that we talk about a fair amount. So yeah, some unique dynamics, and that you all have explored in depth on your blog as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the unique things about CFC is that it is this really interesting mix of kind of like the Gothard,
Mm,
Doug Wilson-y, like really fundamentalist, strict, harsh, I would say, framework,
mm,
but because it's like a Pentecostal, like
mm,
Latter-rain type church, the sort of the message is that these things are impossible except through the power of the Holy Spirit.
mm,
And
mhm,
so any failure to like live up to this impossible standard is a failure to live in the power of the Spirit. And so,
mhm,
you can
mm,
like my mom, like you can pray in tongues while you wash dishes all you want, but like eventually, like there is no physical way that you can do this, but you can't tell anybody that because then like the shame of being a lesser Christian just like comes crashing down on you. And so I feel like it's a really uniquely awful burden that these women, these moms, and to some extent the daughters as well are carrying.
Yeah. Yeah, then there's just shame, a pressure cooker on everyone, and the inevitable user error. If it didn't work, you are the problem. And in that case, yeah, you didn't have enough faith or openness to the spirit or death to self or whatever is laid at your feet. And I think too, it's such a betrayal because often the promises, especially quiverful promises, I think really appeal to people in their youth when they're young and they're having young children. And it's almost like you're how many steps down that path before you maybe realize, the burnout comes, the physical toll on a woman's health comes, the financial strain comes, and the children are still there. Like the decision has been made, and
You
often
can't put them back in.
Can't put them back, and often it's made in these really early years, especially in communities that advocate for early courtship and marriage, and it's kind of like everyone's hustled down this path before their brains are even fully developed, and then carried on a little further by the steam of the movement. But then, yeah, isolation and shame. I hear every so often, I'll hear from a mother of like 10 or 11. And when we did a series looking at the above Ruby's teaching, I heard from one who was part of a small group of women who they all had, kind of been involved in that community and all in on that as young mothers. And I think she said out of like a dozen of them, all of them, it had fallen apart for. They all had chronic health issues. They all had fractured families, broken marriages, abuse. Like it doesn't hold. And I think that realization in midlife is very devastating and difficult to recover from a number of the things that keep women and children trapped in these communities. Lack of education, lack of opportunity, lack of work experience, et cetera, make it very difficult then to pick up the pieces. So there's some really unique practical impacts that come in specifically quiverful homeschooling, high control, those communities.
Yeah.
I did just want to note, Abby, your point about the latter rain Pentecostal flavor, adding something different. I find that really fascinating. And I think contrasted with the more reformed neo-Calvinist folks who tend to fall back on language of the sovereignty of God, there's still a lot of pressure there, like to sort of prove your chosenness. But as with some other things in these more Pentecostal charismatic sects of Christianity, there is, I think, that belief in your agency to move the hand of God by being in touch with the Holy Spirit, basically by the agency of humans. We talk about this in like the worship world a lot right now, because these sort of Seven Mountain Mandate folks have this really strong belief in their ability to kind of usher in the movement of God, that they have some control they can do, like, and I think that shift, that belief in your own like agency, you can do it, you can, like, it becomes this achievable thing through this like performance of devotion, this emotional labor of trying to speak in tongues, trying to have these intense worship experiences, that I imagine for parents who feel like things aren't going well becomes this impossible, never-ending task, and just of intense labor. And having not grown up, I might be overstating that, but as you were saying that, I found myself thinking that is an interesting wrinkle to this, because it does up the like user error thing, right? Like it is possible. It is possible through, like through the power of the Holy Spirit. And that, gosh, what a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a question here in the chat that's kind of related to the survey that
Mm.
we've been results that we've been chatting about.
Mhm.
And we had a question, did any parents comment on regret for their role in corporal punishment for their kids?
Mm. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And many
Um,
described, you could tell who's maybe done some work of reflecting, because many described in detail what they had done and how devastated they were to come to an awareness of what they had done. Not that they were not aware of what they were doing when they did it, but this
Right.
idea where they had believed it was godly, or they had followed the Pearl's teaching, or they thought God's ways are higher, and then to realize how it had destroyed attachment, particularly if they deconstructed some of
Mhm.
this and had grown in awareness of things like child development. It was just very difficult, and many describing attempting to apologize, or just a lot of tears and weeping, describing that level of emotion.
Yeah.
um no, we probably mostly heard from people who see these teachings as problematic.
Right.
That's probably something we did not necessarily hear from a number of people who are like, we think this is great,
Yeah.
I
I did
did
it and I would do it
I would
again.
do it again,
yeah.
right? So
Right.
definitely
Yeah.
our answers skewed that way. Online, I encounter a lot of Christian parents who will still double down on these ideas and defend it, but in our survey, yeah, we did.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah. After we had completed the manuscript, I had a conversation
Mm,
with an author named Joy Berry, who was the author of a book, I think published in the 80s called Happily Ever After. It was a parenting
mm,
book. And she
mm,
was, making the rounds in the Christian parenting world. In her book, she makes what I would call a very half-hearted case for spanking. It's sort of like a we don't understand why, but we know,
mm,
it's sort of like of that time. And she since then has become a staunch advocate for the rights of children. She has left the
mm,
faith altogether, and she is now the author of a lot of other books, kind of focusing on like character development and kind of still writing in that world, but has a lot of regret about
mm,
writing that and advocating for that
mm.
in hindsight. And as far as I know, she is the only author. Well, she's the only author that we probably had contact with who would say, like, I regret writing that. I am sorry I did. And
Mhm.
I wish I could undo it. Um,
There was
and
one,
yeah.
and I can't remember his name. We had this interview this week. There was one other one I spoke with. Um, he was big in the homeschooling world. I
I mean,
cannot
Josh
pull his name out.
Harris?
No, no, no.
I mean,
He
like
was,
Josh
Older
Harris has
guy.
said that he
oh, Josh Harris
regrets.
said, yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, this was an older guy, and it was an interesting interview. He's the one in the corporal punishment chapter. We talk about him because he was a colleague of Michael Pearl. He really
Hmm.
surprised me with this. It was a very interesting mix where he in the conversation expressed deep regret and this awareness that he wished he could have parented the way he sees his adult daughter
Right.
parenting.
Philip
um
Grevin. I'm just looking through your
no,
chapter right now.
and I don't have my book handy, and I could Google it. It's gonna
Wasn't
drive
Larry
me.
Tomzak, that's for
It
sure.
wasn't Larry. It was another like big
Roy
homeschool.
Lesson,
It wasn't Roy Lesson, but it was an R name.
Bruce
What do you think?
Ray.
Who else you got in there? Near the end, you'll see him quoted
All right,
of the
hang on.
spanking chapter. Um,
Russell. Hmm.
maybe
Oh, Bradley.
Bradley, Reb Bradley. Yes, Reb Bradley.
Rev Bradley. Yes,
Here
Thank
we
that's
go.
the one.
Child
There we go.
Training
Oh my
Tips. What
gosh.
I Wish I Had Known When My Children Were Young. Published in 1995.
Yes, and it has on the front of it, it's like an old time. You would recognize it right away from a homeschooling seminar. It has like an old timey
Yeah.
vignette picture. He was very interesting to speak with because on the one hand, he carried all these regrets. He admitted and recognized that he didn't have any special knowledge, and wished he claimed that he went back and revised his original stuff. I didn't go compare, but he claimed to have done that. And at the same time, was not willing to denounce corporal punishment. It was a very interesting cognitive
Hmm.
dissonance because he talked about his regrets. He talked about the realization when he was spanking one of his teenage children, how he kind of had that like, what am I doing moment. He pastored one of the couples that killed their children under Michael Pearl's method. So he was very close in. But it was an interesting, like, yes, I regret this, and I've tried to change my teaching. And also, we didn't mean for that to happen. It was very interesting. And I think that conflict is maybe more representative of a lot of the parents and teachers who propagated this, where if they can get far enough to denounce it, there's still this kind of like, but judge us by our intentions. Like, we didn't mean that. Of course we didn't mean
Right.
that. And
Yeah.
so that disconnect is really clear sometimes.
Yeah. I've got one question in the chat that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and then I want to open it up more broadly for questions.
Sure.
So there's a question about what are your thoughts on the parenting dynamic of the innate sin nature in children, like that theology, and how that can lead to the corporal punishment of babies, and also the fact that these parents are so resistant to seeing their children as fully human, even though sin is a uniquely human trait. Like, how do we think they rationalize these seemingly opposed views, if that makes sense?
That's a good question. Like the opposition between children being sinful and being fully human.
Yeah, like they're fully human. So like this is like why are we treating them as like, little robots that can be programmed, while at the same time, like, sin is like a uniquely human thing. So like they are
Mm-hmm.
fully human, and so like
Mm-hmm.
how are the parents sort of.
Yeah, there's this really interesting juxtaposition of the dehumanization of children, this kind of perception that children are extensions of parental will, the kind of engulfing narcissistic parenting, this kind of view of children as arrows in the culture war, or
Yeah.
props or testimonies, kind of this very clear dehumanization of children with this adultification of children. I mean, Ted Tripp's book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, is a really good example of this, because, it's all about diagnosing the sin in your child's heart. And it's defined by biblical counseling framework that really is adult categories of sin. So it's very strange, because on the one hand, children are non-persons, and on the other hand, they are adults who struggle with, they are defined as adults who struggle with idolatry and lust and jealousy and hypocrisy. Very young children are described in these terms. And I think it really honestly reveals the distorted and incoherent theologies that underlie these things. They're often not, theological terms are not crisply defined. They're not parsed out. There's this weird ecumenicism where you've got a Doug Wilson and a Bill Gothard and the Seven Mountain Mandate people all rallying around children as sinners, babies as sinfully manipulative. But so some of that plays out in weird ways, where sin just becomes catch-alls for any behavior a parent doesn't like, and children are further dehumanized, right? Like in this way. I mean, at the root, it's all dehumanization, but this idea that they are primarily sinners is almost, I would say, more abstract. It again can't conceive of like an individual human being in front of you. And I would say this expands beyond children, because it makes me think of right before the book came out, John MacArthur was promoting or not right before, several months before, maybe the year before, because he died that summer. He was promoting his own book, like The War on Children or something. And there was this clip he had where he was saying, there's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. There's no, all this kind of thing. And it really aligns with this nouthetic biblical counseling view of mental health. But what really struck me is the pastoral incapacity to look at an individual and consider that they have a unique perspective and unique needs, because the entire theological framework is almost plug and play. Like, do this the right way, like put on the right thoughts, put off the wrong thoughts. And And so I would say it even scales up beyond, like we see it in the book, we're really zeroing in on how this impacts children, but I think it scales. Everyone in those communities are also treated as both robotic people expected to obey, to die to self and just put on the right thing. And also these kind of the depersonalized according to abstract categories that really erase people's humanity, that erase incarnational theology that would say Jesus became a human being. So yeah, a number of things that sparks so much thoughts. So many thoughts. What would you say, Kelsey? How would you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think when there's a lot of inconsistency
Yeah,
across these
for sure.
resources in terms of how these authors justify certain choices.
Mm,
One that stands out to me as funny is Ken Ham's book,
mm,
where he just sort of unapologetically talks about children as machines. Like, I mean, they're
mm-hmm,
machines,
mm-hmm.
they're animals, they are programmable, they are trainable, they are the best you can do with a young child is basically condition them in the right direction, and that's your job
Mhm.
as a parent. So homeschooling goes into that, protecting them from certain media goes into that, all of these things. And like even across his own book, he's not particularly consistent either.
Mhm.
He is so blinder vision. The title of the book is Raising Godly Kids in an Ungodly World. So he's very much seeing them as machines to be programmed. They are mechanistic. It's an input output situation. And I remember one conversation I had with a dad of like 5 kids, maybe a little older than me, who was totally appalled that we were taking Ted Tripp's Shepherding a Child's Heart to task,
Mm,
because he was like, that book is it's so gentle, it's so kind. And when you are coming from a Michael Pearl situation, when you're coming from a real nasty behaviorist position, Ted Tripp's sneakily seems more humane, right? Like, oh, we're
mm-hmm.
talking about the inner life of my child.
Heart. Yeah.
But it's talking about the inner life of your child in terms of like, you diagnose this deep, dark sin inside of them. There's like the seeds of sexual immorality already starting to sprout up in
And
there.
your
You got to,
3-year-old.
in your three
Mm-hmm.
year old, you got to keep it in check. But his prose and the way he talks is so earnest and seems so pastoral that it really did make a lot of parents feel like they were reading the kind, gentle, humane book about raising Christian kids. And it's not that, but I think, you know,
It's
it's
winsome.
it's winsome. It's incredibly winsome. And I think particularly for parents of my parents' generation, right? That book came out in 1995. I was 6 in 1995. Um, for them, that felt like a balm. It was
Right.
still had the spanking piece. You still had your kind of like in your arsenal, you had this tool, but you had all this language that made you feel like you were doing spiritual work. You were doing spiritual formation work. You weren't being the mean parent who's treating your child like a pet to be trained. You're pastoring your child. And
Mhm.
the result, that book is also incredibly dehumanizing, but I think it fools people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially as it came after James Dobson's behaviorist conditioning and then
Yeah.
Gary and Anne Marie
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
those really authoritarian, I think it felt distinct. And there's also a lot of proof texted Bible verses. And I'm not gonna lie, when I read that book for the first time, I was appalled at the fact that I mean, appalled and not surprised that
Mhm.
pastors would have read it and recommended it simply because it is the sloppiest even attempt. It's like parenthetical Bible verses untethered. It's just like poor writing in that sense. Like
Mhm.
but when you look at it, there's like 2 pages at the back that list like 30, untethered Bible verses, which I think, particularly for people reading in the 90s, and if you have a high regard for the Bible and biblical authority, that feels right.
Right.
Like it feels
Yeah.
like, oh, well, this is good and godly. Um, and yeah, I think that one's still very popular. That's one
It
of the ones we
is.
examine that's still very popular and very bad. It's a very
Mhm.
bad book.
Very bad.
Yeah. We've got another question in the chat. What was the inspiration to do this work? Was there a personal experience or story that made you want to look into these dynamics? I mean, reading all of these parenting books is not a light endeavor. They're kind of awful.
Mhm.
I was very glad to box them up and gave them up a few months ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, so for me, it really was born out of a number of things. It was uh, right around the time of the sexual abuse crisis in the ACNA, which is a way Abby and I connected. I had been researching and writing a novel set in the Quiverful stay-at-home daughter movement. And I still have hopes that it will find a publication home someday. But my goal there really was to show in story form the way the teaching and the community enabled abuse, and just like to really show that and be like, this is how it happens. So that was on my mind right around the time the abuse crisis in my own denomination became public. And it motivated me to say, what are we doing? Like, how have we not examined the theologies that enable this? And it's very easy to say, well, that person's fringe, or Michael Pearl's very fringe. Reality is still impacted so many people. And isn't that fringe? Like, in some ways, Michael Pearl is just practically naming where all of this stuff leads. So I was kind of like, who's going to write that book? Like, when will that book come out with Christian parenting teaching in particular?
Mhm.
And I think one day an online friend of mine on Twitter had just said, if you had all the time, what's a book you would write about? And I tweeted about it. And the response there was enough to make me think, okay, maybe this is the time to do it. Maybe I'll write a book proposal and see what happens. Because people were saying, yes, I would read that, or I wish I had had that when I was first parenting, or, oh my goodness, yes. And that's how Kelsey and I connected. But for me, it really was a desire, a continued desire to say, we within the Christian community need to acknowledge, name this, identify it, to use Christian terms, repent of it, which involves accurate naming and rejecting it and saying no and helping people pivot to a different way forward. But that tweet is how we connected.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I never thought that I would write a book of this kind. Um, just, my given my academic background and stuff, it just was not what I
Mhm.
assumed. But when my oldest, who's now 8, was about 1, um, I did not read parenting books, but like before I had children,
Mm.
and I had not, done a lot of babysitting. I just,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I'd been the oldest of 4 girls, but had never given much thought to parenting or raising kids. And when she was around 1, someone gave me Shepherding a Child's Heart, which I knew that my parents had loved. And I read it and was just appalled by what I found in it. And yet I was like, I felt paralyzed because it was like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm a Christian. I think I share this guy's worldview, but I'm also working on my graduate degree. I'm working at a think tank that does, research on the rights of children. I I do not know how to reconcile the way this man is telling me to treat my child with what I believe about children. But what do I believe about children then? Because the only stuff that I had kind of in my like evangelical lizard brain, like some assumptions in there that would sort of come up when my toddler said no. And I would think, is that like a form of rebellion that I need to be really, really worried about? Like this book would tell me yes. But kind of in my I want to say in my spirit, I was sort of like, I don't know if that's true. Like, and I didn't know, I felt paralyzed because I didn't know where else I could go because I had been
Mhm.
adequately scared of going to mainstream parenting resources, right? Like everybody else is wrong, everybody else is permissive, this worldly way of raising kids, it's it's so high stakes. How could you?
Mhm.
And I decided, I have to go find something else. And so I just started poking around in more mainstream resources, listening to parenting podcasts, reading some books about child development, reading some popular parenting books by people like Tina Payne Bryson or Dan Siegel, and just realizing that there is a whole other world of language around how we deal with young children in the difficulty of their growing up. Like there is a whole world of resources out there that talks about things like developmentally appropriate behavior. I still remember the first time that concept was introduced to me, and it was like a weight came off of my shoulders, because up until that point, I had just thought, okay, I need to figure out what of these are sins and what of them are not, so I can like sort them accordingly. And then to be given this idea that like some of this is just normal, and it's a part of child development. And I think I was able to recognize that, even if from a Christian worldview, even if I don't actually know where I stand on what we look for or how we diagnose sin, I think you can come to the belief about children that maybe we don't get to know. And even if I could know, how would that change how I respond to my 3-year-old when she's having a hard time? Right? Like, I think there was so much more freedom out there that I found when I started looking around. And so my husband and I started going through our Christian parenting books, like taking notes and like just writing, just, both of us academics, this is not our area at all, but we were so confused and just wanting to work it out together. So anyway, we did all of that and then just didn't do anything with it for like 7 years. We just had it sit there. And, I would sort of come back to the ideas every once in a while. And then never really thought much more about it until I saw Marissa's tweet and was like, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I wonder if, this much more experienced writer who might actually do this would be interested in like having a conversation partner, or maybe would be interested in some of the notes that we have on this particular book. So that is how that happened. Very much from sort of a personal experience for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we met and we're like, should we do it together? And we're like,
yeah.
And I'm so grateful because you bring such a solid background in investigative journalism, but also in history. And we wanted that to be a big piece of the book. And so it really worked out. I think as a result is a much stronger book together than either of us could have done separately. So it really has been a lovely process. And coming up on 3 years since we first connected.
Ooh, we've got another good question in the chat. If you could address the parents who've used these resources, who now have grown estranged children, what would you want their main takeaway to be?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I do often address them online or individually. I think some of it would depend on where they're coming from. Because I think frankly, I try and be strategic when I'm talking about these things with the hopes that it will be received in a way that people can hear, because all parents, like I'm a parent, I know that vulnerability that comes, and I'm sure will continue to come. I have some young adult children, and there's a defensiveness when someone comes to you and says, this, whatever you intended, this hurt me. And so I try to be really attuned to that with the hope to be able to communicate, because I think families have been robbed of so much in this. So if a parent is kind of stuck in their own pain, right? If that's looming largest for them, a lot of times I will encourage them that the reality waiting on the other side of acknowledgement of what happened is not cosmic punishment for them. Because I think these ideas were pressure cookers for parents. Yes, I think there were abusive people who were drawn to this. I think a really large number of parents also were both victims and victimizers, both. And so it gets complicated. So I will try to speak to that, because I think that's a big hurdle. Like if you've operated under this, some of the stuff we're talking about, like you mentioned, Abby, this idea of the spirits indwelling and the ideals, the high stakes, the eternal stakes, to even get to the point where you can say, I made a mistake. I was wrong. I thought this was biblical, but oh my God, have mercy. It was not, you know, like that kind of realization, I think is almost unbearable for some parents. So I try and encourage them that cosmic punishment is not waiting for them either, that there can be grace for parents too, and that they can grow and change their mind and learn how to attempt repair. I also try and be truthful and say that parenting choices have consequences, and sometimes adult children don't want repair and reconciliation for understandable reasons. And I try and say that directly, because a lot of times I will often get messages from parents who are kind of like, what can I do? I've tried this and my adult child won't even talk to me. They're really looking for practical tools to fix this. And so try and just make space for lamentation and grief, which evangelicals who've operated by these ideas are very ill-equipped to do all of this, right? Like very ill-equipped to do all of this, to take accountability, to name things, to be wrong, to lament, to grieve, all of that. And then I will try and encourage them to get curious about what drew them to these teachings in the first place, and to get curious about why it felt right to them, or why they ignored their intuition if they had reservations about what they were doing, and to seek out qualified licensed mental health help, that someone who can help them work through family systems, family of origin dynamics in their own life, and learn how to kind of take an inventory and how to begin that process of repair. Because I really think it requires faith deconstruction, and it requires a solid commitment to learning about oneself and new ways of doing things. So those are kind of like my hopeful encounters. Sometimes I hear from parents who are hardened and are doubling and tripling down, and I will be more direct with them about taking accountability and acknowledging the harm. And I think online spaces provide a really unique opportunity for that, because I hear from a number of people regularly that multiple conversations in online spaces became a gateway out of them, out of these communities in ways that real life interactions maybe can't. So I will always try and have a conversation with those parents as compassionately as possible, trying to retain their humanity, but also honestly saying, look, there are real consequences. There are real, the measure of what happened here can't be your intention. You need to be able to reckon with the impact. So yeah, it's difficult. I am always encouraged to hear from older parents who have done that work. There are some who have and are willing to talk about it. And I think that's really important for other families to see that publicly, not to give them like a false sense of hope, but to sort of say, no, it do this work. Like no one can guarantee the outcome here, but doubling down and tripling down into fragility and defensiveness, but I meant the best I could, really pretty much guarantee that's not going to lead to any kind of repair, you know? Yeah. So it's tough though.
Yeah.
That wasn't a main takeaway. Maybe Kelsey, you have a main takeaway.
No, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add other than that. I think when I hear from people who have gone no contact, one of the common things that they'll say is that like a full-throated affirmation of the pain can be hard to come by. Yeah. That understandably so. Parents kind of they want to hold on to a piece of like, but I need, like, they want their kid to acknowledge, we know that you did, like they want some kind of, they want the child to kind of make them feel better about it. And that dynamic is so hard. And every family is so different. So I do not think there's a one size fits all way to go at that. But I do think that that is maybe a helpful thing for parents to know, is that for a child, even an adult child who seems like a relatively well-adjusted adult child, they are looking for, in most cases, just no equivocation, no asking for reassurances, just they want acknowledgement of the pain and an admission of wrongdoing. And that can be really that, I mean, of course, like I have a hard time admitting when I'm wrong and I was trying to do something right. Like, of course, that's so hard. And there is no easy way around that. But I do think the half apologies and the kind of looking for some reciprocal reassurance, I think that can poison those efforts to bridge the gap a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say that to
Mm-hmm.
parents who are estranged from children who are looking to do repair. I think part of your job as the parent now is to bear that to bear that burden and not
Yeah.
ask your kid to help you bear that burden
Yeah.
anymore
Yeah.
at this point. Maybe
Yeah.
they will in the future. Maybe, I have no idea, but don't
Mm-hmm.
go looking to not ask anything of them,
Mm-hmm.
including any reassurances.
Yeah. Or relationship even, because
Right.
I think often they can feel like if I do this, then I'll get relationship back or
Right.
something. And I did think of one key thing I would say is if they can hear it, if any of them are listening, I would say if you've practiced these ways of parenting, you are uniquely ill-equipped to do this. Like you have trained yourself in different ways of operating. You have day in and day out practiced expectations for instant compliance, expectations for your children to kind of do what you think they should do. You have missed out on opportunities to see them as individuals and learn to relate to them as individuals. And that is something worth exploring. All those things worth exploring, how you landed there, what in your own story made you turn to these ideas. But it's worth noting, like, this will not intuitively come easily to you, and it will not feel natural, and it will probably be very triggering. And so I think that's important to empower parents to be like, do this work. Like, it will require some intentional work though, because the and we close our book with this, like, yes, entire families were trained up in these ways, and that has created ruts that families go in. So I would kind of encourage people to take seriously that, man, if something has been practiced for 20, 30 years, it is going to take some intentional work to learn new patterns of relating.
Yeah, yeah, because both parents and children have kind of been trained in very transactional relationships,
Yes.
right? Like if I do this thing, it will fix this thing.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And switching that after decades is incredibly hard. And I really want to commend the parents that I do see doing that very, very hard work, because it is incredibly hard. But it needs to be done. Like, as someone who is no contact with my own family, like, to think about what would it be like to have my parents do that kind of work. I don't know if that will ever happen, but yeah, that could be, I mean, that could be life-changing. So, all right. We are at 12 past the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time, especially since you both have young ones in the house. But thank you so much, Kelsey and Marissa. It was really lovely chatting with you, and I'm very grateful for your book. I'm grateful that you wrote it, and I hope that in sometime in the future they consider doing a revised and updated edition with at least 100 more pages, because
sounds good.
We have so many appendices we would love to add.
I know. I really, really wanted to reach out to Caitlin, your editor, and be like, Caitlin,
hey,
give them more pages.
Oh my goodness. Our original rough draft, our first draft that we submitted was like, it was over 100,000 words, I think, with all our footnotes and appendices. And she was kind of like, excuse me, what? It's supposed to be 50,000 words. So we landed at like 60,000, but still, yeah.
Yes, yes. It deserved more space. I
Thank
will
you.
die on that hill. But thank you so much. I will look forward to putting this up on YouTube so that everyone can enjoy our discussion and yeah, have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You, same to you all.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.